What if the most dangerous secrets of a trillion-dollar empire weren't locked in vaults or servers, but in the dreams of the people who built it? Have you ever woken up with a strange word on your tongue? A sequence of numbers you can't place? A feeling that you lived a whole other life in the dark? What if those weren't just echoes of your own mind, but fragments of someone else's? Alara Vance knew about fragments. Her life was a collection of them. A fragment of a degree, paused indefinitely. A fragment of a family, fractured by debt and illness. A fragment of a salary, earned as an intern in the cavernous, sterile belly of Orion Capital. A place where she was utterly and completely invisible. Her job was to exist in the margins, fetching coffee, collating reports no one would read, and replacing the paper and printers that cost more than her car. She moved through the gleaming steel and glass corridors like a ghost, her worn coat a stark contrast to the tailored armor of the financial titans around her. They never saw her. They saw the coffee cup in her hand, the stack of papers in her arms, but never the quiet intelligence in her deep brown eyes, never the fierce, desperate hope she guarded in her heart. But Alara saw them, and more than that, she heard them. In the hushed, exhausted quiet of the pre-dawn hours, when traders napped at their desks, she heard the whispers, not of office gossip or market fears, but of something deeper, stranger. An analyst in leveraged finance would murmur, "Sierra 9. The lock is cobalt." A senior partner, asleep in his chair, would twitch and say, "The asset is the water right, not the land." A secretary would jolt awake, rubbing her temples, complaining of a recurring dream about a winding staircase that always ended at a door with no handle. Nonsense. The exhausted ramblings of overworked minds. That's what anyone else would think. But Alara, burdened by a mind that couldn't stop seeing patterns, started writing them down. In a cheap, spiral-bound notebook she kept hidden in her locker, she collected the fragments. A date from one person, a name from another. A geographical coordinate whispered by a janitor dreaming in the hallway. A color, a code, a warning. She didn't know what it was. This strange, subconscious language spoken by the sleepers of Orion Capital, but she felt its weight. It was a mosaic of secrets, and every night, the employees of the great and powerful bank were unknowingly whispering another piece into the world. She felt like a cartographer of the forgotten, mapping a world that only existed behind closed eyes, unaware that she was slowly, painstakingly drawing the blueprint of a conspiracy so vast it defied imagination. A conspiracy that was about to wake up and notice her. The king of this silent, sleeping kingdom was Julian Thorne. He was not a man who dreamt. He was a man who conquered. As CEO of Orion Capital, a legacy bequeathed to him by his formidable and ruthless father, Julian moved through the world with a chilling precision. His suits were sharp enough to cut glass, his gaze a calculated assessment of risk and reward. They called him the Ice King on the trading floor, a man whose heart beat in sync with the market ticker, cold, relentless, and digital. But his empire had a ghost. An account, dormant for 30 years, had suddenly shown a flicker of activity. A single, minuscule transaction that should have been impossible. The account didn't officially exist. Its ledgers were wiped, its history a digital phantom. Yet it was there, a crack in the perfect, monolithic foundation of Orion. It was a problem his uncle, Marcus Thorne, a permanent fixture on the board and a relic of his father's era, insisted was a simple glitch. A rounding error, Julian, Marcus had said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. Let the old dogs lie, but Julian hadn't inherited his father's empire by ignoring glitches. He felt the cold tendril of a deeper wrongness. One afternoon, driven by a rare restlessness, he left his penthouse office and walked the floors. The air hummed with controlled chaos, the symphony of global finance. It was then that he saw her, the intern Alara. She wasn't doing anything remarkable. She was standing beside the desk of a senior analyst, a man named Peterson who was pale and sweating, having just jolted awake from a nightmare. His colleagues ignored him, too busy to notice his distress. But the intern was there, speaking in a low, calm voice. "It's all right," she was saying. "It's just a dream. 7 Alpha Kilo. It doesn't mean anything. Julian froze. 7 Alpha Kilo. It was a fragment of the access key for the Ghost account's primary server cluster. A fragment known only to him, his chief of staff, and a handful of senior security techs. It was impossible for an intern to know it. He watched as she offered the man a glass of water, her expression one of simple, unadorned empathy. She was a ghost in his machine, and she was speaking its forbidden language. He didn't know why or how, but in that moment, the most powerful man in the building knew he needed to talk to the most invisible person in it. The summons came via a sterile email. Mr. Thorne requires your presence in the executive suite. Immediately, Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was how it ended. They'd seen her with her notebook, they thought she was stealing secrets, she was going to be fired, maybe even arrested. She smoothed down her simple dress, her hands trembling, and took the silent, high-speed elevator to the top floor, a place interns like her only ever saw in corporate promotional videos. The office was less a room and more a section of the sky, walled in by floor-to-ceiling glass that looked down on the city like a god. And behind a vast, obsidian desk, sat Julian Thorne. He didn't ask her to sit. He simply watched her, his blue eyes analytical, piercing. "Peterson," he said, his voice a low baritone that filled the silent room. "Down in analytics. You spoke to him. You recited a code. 7 Alpha Kilo. Where did you hear it?" Alara's throat was dry. The truth sounded like insanity. "He said it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "In his sleep. He was having a nightmare." Julian's eyebrow raised a fraction of an inch, the only sign of his surprise. He was dreaming of a classified server key? She clutched the strap of her worn bag, her knuckles white. "I don't know what it is. I hear things. People talk when they're asleep. They say things that don't make sense. I write them down. I thought maybe it was just stress. But there are patterns." It was a foolish, flimsy explanation, and she expected him to laugh, to call security. Instead, he leaned forward, the picture of predatory stillness. "Patterns," he repeated softly. He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. On it was a short, alphanumeric string, M4 Rigel Blue. "Another fragment from my glitch," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "It's meaningless. A dead end. My best cryptographers can't break it. If your theory is correct, if my company is whispering its secrets in its sleep, then prove it. Find me what this means." He was testing her. It was a ridiculous, impossible test. But as Alara looked at the code, a flicker of recognition sparked in her memory. Rigel. A trader on the 3rd floor had nightmares about a blue star. M4. A woman in accounting dreamt of a boat with that number on its hull. It was crazy. It was impossible. But it was there, in the pages of her hidden notebook. "Okay," she said, her voice finding a sliver of strength. It was the single most important word she had ever spoken. For the next 48 hours, Alara lived in the hum of the office. She wasn't an intern anymore. She was a hunter, with Julian's silent, inexplicable authority shielding her. She moved through the floors not as a ghost, but as a listener. She brought coffee to the commodities desk and listened to a man dream of the smell of salt and diesel. She helped a programmer reboot his machine and heard him mutter about a harbor master's ledger. She collected whispers, fragments of sensory data, disconnected words. Her notebook filled with a chaotic web of associations. M4 wasn't a boat. It was a sector in the Old Port Authority registry. Rigel wasn't just a star. It was the name of a cargo freighter that had been scuttled off the coast 20 years ago. And Blue was the code name for its illicit cargo, spoken in a nightmare by a retired logistics manager she tracked down in the company archives. None of it made sense individually, but together, woven by Alara's unique perception, it formed a tapestry of a forgotten crime. She stood before Julian Thorne once more, her notebook open on his vast desk. She was exhausted, her eyes burning with fatigue, but her voice was clear and steady. "It's not one piece of data," she explained, her finger tracing the connections she had drawn. "It's a mnemonic key, a memory deliberately fractured and stored across the subconscious minds of at least 3 different people who were involved in the original event. The code isn't something you decrypt. It's something you remember. She laid it all out. The freighter, the illegal cargo, and the final piece of the puzzle. A name, whispered by a dreaming security guard. The name of the shell corporation that received the payment. It was the same name as the ghost account. Julian sat in stunned silence. The silence of a man whose entire reality had just been tilted on its axis. He typed the information into his secure terminal. He used the fragmented memories as a password. And the ghost account opened. It was real. A multi-billion-dollar slush fund, created by his father, hidden not in code, but in the collective, sleeping mind of his own company. He looked at Alara, truly looked at her for the first time. Not as an intern, not as a curiosity, but as the only person who could navigate the labyrinth his father had built. "My father didn't just build a bank," Julian murmured, his voice laced with a dark awe. "He built a vault out of people." Without another word, he made a call. The next day, Alara's life was scrubbed clean. Her intern pass was replaced with an all-access security card. Her cramped apartment was swapped for a secure corporate suite. Her closet of a workspace vanished, and she was installed in a private office adjacent to Julian's, a room with its own panoramic view of the city. She was no longer a ghost. She was the key. Her new job had no title. Her only directive, delivered by Julian in the hushed quiet of her new office, was simple. Listen. Find every secret my father buried. The shift was seismic, and it did not go unnoticed. Marcus Thorne, with his affable smile and cold, watchful eyes, saw it all. He saw the intern being escorted to the executive floor. He saw the hushed, intense conversations between her and his nephew. He saw the way Julian, who had always kept the world at a calculated distance, now seemed to orbit this quiet, unassuming young woman. He cornered Julian in the hallway, his voice a low, paternal warning. "A word of advice, nephew. Power is a fragile thing. Don't rest it on the shoulders of a nobody. This girl, she's a risk. Whatever game you're playing, end it." Julian's gaze was like ice. "She's not a risk, Marcus. She's an asset." But Marcus's warning echoed in the air. A promise of conflict. He represented the old guard, the men who had built Orion alongside Julian's father. Men who knew exactly which secrets were buried, and how deep. Alara felt the danger pressing in. The whispers she collected now felt heavier, darker. She began to piece together a horrifying truth. The system, which she privately called the Morpheus Protocol, wasn't just for hiding illicit funds. It was for erasure. She found fragments of deals where smaller, rival companies were cannibalized, their assets absorbed, their founders ruined. But it was worse than that. She found names. Names of journalists who got too close. Names of regulators who asked too many questions. Names of employees who discovered a truth they shouldn't have. These people hadn't just been silenced. They had been digitally and financially erased. Their identities, their histories, their very existence, were dismantled, broken into meaningless data, and uploaded into the dream stream of Orion's workforce. The company wasn't just a bank. It was a cemetery, and the employees in their sleep were the unknowing tombstone keepers. A subtle, unspoken bond was forming between Alara and Julian. In the late hours, surrounded by projections of fragmented data, they worked in a bubble of shared purpose. She saw past his Ice King facade to the man underneath, burdened by a legacy he was only now discovering was built on lies. He saw in her a strength and integrity that had been absent from his world of gilded cages and calculated allegiances. It wasn't romance, not yet, but it was a profound, magnetic connection. Two isolated souls finding a fixed point in a world that was rapidly dissolving into a nightmare. One night, as she was cross-referencing a list of erased shell corporations with old financial news archives, a name leaped out at her. Vance Innovations, a small, promising tech firm that had declared a sudden, catastrophic bankruptcy 25 years ago. The founder was a man named Arthur Vance. Her grandfather. The story she had been told was one of bad luck, a market downturn, a failed product. A simple tragedy that had sent her family into a spiral of debt and despair from which they had never recovered. But here it was in the dream fragments of Orion Capital. The truth. Her grandfather hadn't failed. He had been targeted. He had created a data security algorithm that could have threatened Orion's hidden operations. And so he was erased. The Morpheus Protocol had been used to systematically dismantle his company, drain his finances, and ruin his reputation. They hadn't just taken his company. They had stolen his life, his legacy, his name. The fragments told the whole ugly story. A dream of a forged signature from a legal secretary. A nightmare of a sabotaged server from a former IT tech. A whispered, sleeping confession from a retired acquisitions officer who dreamt of a hostile takeover that wasn't on the books. The weight of it crushed the air from Alara's lungs. This wasn't just a corporate conspiracy anymore. This was her family's story. This was the wound she had lived with her entire life. The source of her mother's illness. The reason for her own fragmented existence. She walked into Julian's office, the printouts shaking in her hand. There were no tears, only a cold, burning clarity. She laid them on his desk. "You wanted to know what your father built," she said, her voice hollow. "He built this. He destroyed my family." Julian looked at the name, then back at her face, and for the first time since she'd met him, the Ice King looked utterly broken. The carefully constructed walls around him crumbled, revealing not a king, but the son of a monster, horrified by the sins of his father. "Alara," he started, his voice raw, but there were no words. The chasm that opened between them was filled with the ghosts of the past, with the profound, personal cost of the secrets she had unearthed. The mission was no longer about abstract justice. It was about reclamation. Marcus knew he was losing control. The boy was digging too deep, guided by that witch of an intern. He had tried warnings, subtle threats, but Julian was his brother's son, stubborn and unyielding. It was time for a more direct approach. He decided to use the system against them. He found a loyalist, a senior vice president whose career he had personally sponsored, a man deeply embedded in the Morpheus Protocol. Through carefully worded suggestions and hypnotic cues disguised as performance reviews, Marcus planted a new set of dream fragments into the man's subconscious. These fragments were different. They were a lie. They were pieces of a false trail, designed to lead Alara and Julian to a fabricated data cache that would implicate them in a massive scheme to embezzle funds from the company. It was the perfect trap. They would be discredited, removed, and he would step in to stabilize the company, purging the system and burying the truth forever. As Alara tracked the new whispers, something felt wrong. The patterns were too clean, too obvious. It was like following a trail of breadcrumbs laid out by hand. She voiced her concerns to Julian, but he, driven by guilt and a desperate need to atone for his father's sins, pushed forward. "We have to follow it," he insisted. "It could be the key to everything." Meanwhile, Arthur Finch, Julian's perpetually worried chief of staff and lawyer, had his own suspicions about Marcus. He had served Julian's father and knew the darkness the old man was capable of. He also knew that Marcus was cut from the same cloth. On a hunch, Arthur began a discreet, off-the-books investigation into Marcus's recent activities. He pulled old security protocols, cross-referenced communication logs, and found a discrepancy. A backdoor access code to the Morpheus Protocol's core programming, an override key that only Marcus possessed. He saw the digital fingerprints of Marcus's manipulation, the way the new dream data had been artificially inserted. He ran to Julian's office, his face pale. "It's a trap, Julian. Marcus is framing you. He's leading you into a digital dead end. He's scheduled a special board meeting for tomorrow morning to have you removed. He's going to accuse you of corporate espionage and use this fabricated evidence as proof." The realization hit them like a physical blow. They had been played. Marcus wasn't just trying to stop them, he was planning a coup. They had less than 12 hours to stop him from seizing control of the empire and burying its secrets for good. The emergency board meeting was a somber affair. The air in the mahogany-paneled room was thick with tension. Marcus Thorne stood at the head of the long table, the very picture of grave concern. He spoke of instability, of reckless leadership, of a security breach that threatened the very foundations of Orion Capital. He presented his fabricated evidence, a complex web of digital transactions that seemed to lead directly to a private server owned by Julian. It was damning. He had the votes. The board members, old allies of his father, nodded grimly. The motion to remove Julian Thorne as CEO was on the table. Just as the chairman prepared to call the vote, the heavy doors to the boardroom swung open. Julian walked in, followed closely by Alara. She wasn't carrying a tablet or a binder of evidence. She was only carrying her cheap, spiral-bound notebook. "This is a private meeting," Marcus snapped, his composure cracking for a fraction of a second. "You have no right to be here." Julian ignored him, his gaze sweeping across the faces of the board members. "Before you vote," he said, his voice ringing with a newfound authority, "you are owed the truth, not about me, about this company, about the price of your success." He nodded to Alara. All eyes turned to her, the invisible intern, standing before the most powerful men and women in finance. She was terrified, but a calm resolve settled over her. She would not be a ghost anymore. She opened her notebook. "I'm not here to talk about servers or encryption," she began, her voice quiet but clear, carrying to every corner of the silent room. "I'm here to tell you a story. It's about a man named Arthur Vance." She didn't present data. She wove a narrative. She spoke of her grandfather's dream, his small company, his brilliant algorithm. Then, she began to stitch the truth together, live, from the dream fragments she had collected. "Mr. Abernathy," she said, looking directly at the head of acquisitions. "For 20 years, you've had a recurring dream about signing a document in a room that smells of ozone. Haven't you? That was the smell of the server room where you authorized the liquidation of my grandfather's primary assets." Using a forged signature, Abernathy went white. "Ms. Chun," she continued, turning to the head of legal, "you dream of a weeping willow tree. It's the same tree that was outside the courthouse on the day Vance Innovations was declared bankrupt. A case you won based on evidence you knew was falsified." A gasp went through the room. One by one, she moved around the table, not accusing, but revealing. She connected their private nightmares, a specific number, a forgotten address, a flash of a face, to the systematic destruction of her grandfather's life. She was holding up a mirror to their own subconscious minds, showing them the fragmented guilt they had carried for decades without understanding why. She was making the dream real. The final piece was for Marcus. "And you, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice steady. "You dream of a cobalt lock. Sierra 9. It's the key to the original erased account where the profits from my grandfather's destruction were hidden. The account you created with Julian's father." Marcus lunged to his feet, his face a mask of fury. "This is insane. Lies and fantasies from a delusional girl." But it was too late. The seed of truth had been planted. The board members were looking at each other, at Marcus, their expressions a mixture of horror, dawning comprehension, and fear. They had been sleeping partners in a crime they never knew they'd committed. The dam of secrets broke. In the ensuing chaos, Marcus Thorne was exposed, his coup collapsing into a desperate, failed attempt to cover a lifetime of crimes. The authorities were called, not by an outside agency, but by Julian himself. He opened the doors to Orion Capital, inviting federal investigators to unearth every secret buried within the Morpheus Protocol. The scandal was cataclysmic, shaking the foundations of global finance. But instead of letting the empire crumble, Julian began the painstaking process of rebuilding it into something new. He liquidated the ghost accounts, dedicating the trillions of dollars hidden within them to a new organization, the Vance Foundation. Its sole purpose was to find the families of the erased, to restore the stolen wealth, to rebuild the lives that Orion Capital had destroyed. Alara, no longer an intern, was made the foundation's director. Her gift was not a tool for corporate espionage anymore. It was a tool for healing, for finding the lost and giving them back their names. Months later, she stood with Julian in his office, looking out at the same panoramic view of the city. The glass no longer felt like a barrier separating them from the world, but a window offering a view of a future they were building together. The romantic tension that had simmered beneath the surface had blossomed into a quiet, powerful partnership built on mutual respect and a shared, brutal honesty. "My father thought he was creating the perfect vault," Julian said, his voice thoughtful. "He never realized the human mind isn't a vault. It's a garden. Secrets don't just lie there. They fester, they grow, and eventually, they demand to be brought into the light." He turned to her, his eyes full of a warmth she never thought she'd see. "Thank you, Alara, for showing me the truth." She gave him a small, genuine smile. "The truth was always there," she said. "It was just waiting for someone to listen. And what about you? What secrets are hidden in the quiet corners of your life? In the fragmented dreams you can't quite remember when you wake? What truth is waiting for you to be brave enough to listen?" Share your thoughts in the comments below, and maybe together we can start to piece together a better story for all of us.